Now, here's one beautiful thing that Imam Malik used to do with his teacher. And again, you guys need to understand this, because learning the knowledge of the deen, see, this is the most beautiful thing in life. It is for us when we want to learn, like anybody here who wants to become a real estate agent, for example. You have to take courses for that. If you would like to become a physician, you have to go to school for that. It takes like 10 years, right? If you would like to become a truck driver, you have to take courses for that, right? If you want to do anything that is valuable in the modern world, you have to go to school for it. You have to get some license, some certificate, continuing education, whatever it may be, right? And then we always have, across the street, and then we have to go and study and buy the books and pay tuition and take tests and semester after semester until we get our degree, right? And that, we're talking about the mundane knowledge of dunya. But it's always when it comes to the knowledge of Islam that we think, oh, this is something I'll just learn on in passing. Sister, what is your primary source of knowledge in Islam? I go to Jum'ah. Right? Brother, where'd you learn the deen? I do lots of internet research. All the time. Right? Only the knowledge of Islam is the lightest, the easiest that we deal with. Every other form of knowledge, we have to go out of our way and study and get certificates. As a matter of fact, I was actually talking to our team, and I think that those of you who attended at least 6 of the 7 classes should actually get a certificate. Certificate of completion, that you have studied this, and this is the material, and this is what you learned, and stuff like that. I think it only makes sense. Only the knowledge of Islam that we somehow think that it'll just come to us. It'll just come to us. Just by being in the masjid. What is your primary source of the deen? Well, I hang out with the brothers a lot. Right? It doesn't work like that. Imam Malik used to go out of his way 7 years with one scholar, another 7 years with a second scholar, and then as you will see, more and more years with other scholars. He used to, because again, Ibn Hormuz was blind, so he would take him to buy stuff from the marketplace. He would take him to the masjid. He would spend almost every single day, from dawn until Salat al-Isha, at the house of Ibn Hormuz, just studying. Ibn Hormuz would get tired of him. And then he would say, I need to spend time with my family, please leave me. And then Malik would just go outside and just sit next to the door. And then when they have eaten dinner, he would just come back, right? And this is how keen he was, and it doesn't come to you. This is why 1400 years later, we still mention his name, and we have a lecture to honor his career. So the knowledge of Islam, you have to dedicate some time to it. It doesn't just come like that, right? And as I said, he spent so much time with Ibn Hormuz, and that's why he absorbed not only his knowledge, but he absorbed his qualities. His humility, his patience, his perseverance, how he handled debates, how he responded to offensive remarks, how he responded to praise, how when he's invited to eat, what does he say? Jazakallah khairan, maybe later, or I'm absolutely hungry, where is the food? I mean, these little social skills, you need to see someone that you trust that practices them in front of you. Our children, they have to see us all the time doing things in order to learn. It doesn't come to them naturally, right? The third one, as I said earlier, was Nafi'. Nafi', I think is the most famous of all of his scholars, even though he didn't spend that much time. But Nafi', his name was Nafi' ibn Sarjis, and he was also of Persian descent. But with Nafi', he even had a bit of an accent in his Arabic. Not only that he's not of Arabic descent, he himself was not Arab. He did not know Arabic that well, but he was one of the greatest scholars of his time. And believe it or not, he also was a slave. SubhanAllah. But again, their notion of slavery is completely different than ours. And Nafi', they completely forgot about his name, Ibn Sarjis. They completely forgot about his kunya, Nafi' al-Daylami. They started calling him Nafi' Mawla ibn Umar. See, they used the word Mawla, which means someone who's dependent on someone else, as opposed to the slave of Ibn Umar. They wouldn't say Abd ibn Umar, they would say Mawla ibn Umar. Just to try to use a milder word. And Abdullah ibn Umar ibn al-Khattab, it would not be an exaggeration to say in terms of his style of scholarship, he was the most conservative. And I don't mean conservative in the very superficial sense that we use today, but I mean conservative in the sense that he was so keen about not using his mind and processing information. I might go astray, I might do something wrong, I might inspire others or students to do something wrong. So just tell me what the Quran says, what the Hadith says, I'll do it literally without any thinking. Right? And that was his teacher. Nafi' was a student of Ibn Umar, and this is what he learned. And he basically transferred that to Imam Malik. There was actually one thing that I really wanted to mention, but I totally forgot, about Ibn Hurmuz, and that is, historians say the greatest thing that Malik learned from Ibn Hurmuz wasn't the qualities or the ilm or any of that, it was the ability to say, I don't know. I don't know. Ibn Hurmuz, most of the time, would be asked, and he just says, I don't know. Imam, what do you think if I did this and that with my wudu? What do you think? I don't know. I want to pay my zakah about these other things, and it's just a complicated story. I don't know. Come back in 3 days. I'll have to think about it. Right? I will ask another scholar who knows better. I will consult with someone else. But I don't have the answer right now. And Imam Malik, as you will see, this stuck with him for the rest of his life. It was really inspiring. Today, subhanAllah, just people, they feel compelled to answer all questions. Right? Even if you ask for directions. It's either you know or you don't, right? How can I get to Grant Street? Just go around the corner, make a right, and then I think it's a left after that. I don't know. Bob, what do you think? Just say I don't know, right? And then when it comes to the knowledge of the deen, most of us actually refrain from saying no. You know, I'm not a scholar or anything, but I think that this is how it's done. SubhanAllah. You're not a scholar? Okay, so why are you talking about it? If it's common knowledge that most of us understand, then that's fine, right? How many, because we shouldn't like become extremely difficult with people. How many rak'ahs in dhuhr? Ask the Imam. It has to be balanced, right? There's common knowledge that most people understand, and then there's knowledge that if it exceeds a certain level of profundity, if it becomes a little bit deeper and it needs some processing and some grasping of different forms of evidence and so forth, then you are always better off saying, I don't know, just ask someone who does. Going back to Nafi', they actually said that the golden chain of hadith, which is basically the Prophet ﷺ, this is the most honorable and the greatest, the highest level of transmission, basically in ilm al-hadith. It goes from the Prophet ﷺ to Abdullah ibn Umar, to Nafi', to Imam Malik, and then al-Shafi'i, to other narrators. Imam Malik used to do something very interesting because he wants to hog the time of his teachers. Like I said, he just bothers Ibn Hurmuz so much that he has to kick him out every once in a while. Imam Malik had this really ingenious way of making sure that he hogs the time of his teachers. So he would basically, people would be coming to Ibn Hurmuz's house, for instance, to ask questions. And he would basically give candy to other kids, like some of his friends. Just go distract those guys. Do something, jump around, pull their clothes, whatever. So they don't arrive at the house of Ibn Hurmuz, so I can spend an extra 5 minutes and get my stuff done. Remember, he has a string with 35 knots, and he probably forgot 3 like every day. He has to go back and recite the whole thing in order to make sure that he has all the ahadith. So he devised these interesting ways in order to distract people so the scholars spend more time with him. And subhanAllah, I really, today, we complain all the time that, the scholars, they don't have time for us. As a matter of fact, Imam Suhaib, like today, he has this, he changed the picture on his Facebook page, and there's just this really angry guy that is saying, why are you not responding to my text messages? It is really like we have such expectations. If you are serving a community of thousands of people, obviously, we will not be able to respond to emails promptly, or text messages, or Facebook messages, or all kinds of Twitter messages, and it's just, and the people get upset. And then, you know what? I'm not even interested in that anymore. The Imam didn't respond to him. For a day and a half, he did not email me back. Look at Malik. He is being kicked out by the scholar, and he waits outside and comes back in order to learn. So here's me trying to be nice all the time. I'm sure I'll get back with you. Absolutely. You're making a very important point. Imagine that brother, just get out of my office. What would you do? Be extremely offended and leave the masjid and stop praying, right? These guys just thought of this stuff in a very, very different way. Last one is Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri, the only Arab in this incredible group of scholars. And I keep emphasizing this because these scholars understood Arabic. It was the language of science and the language of modernity at the time. But, you know, being of a different heritage did not matter at all. Imam az-Zuhri was entrusted by Umar ibn Azeez to start collecting ahadith and to write them down. So he was actually, most historians agree that he was the first scribe of ahadith. Before Malik, before Abu Hanifa, before Bukhari, before Al-Muwatta, right? It was Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri. Unfortunately, none of his texts survive. Some people say they were destroyed when the Mongols devastated the library of Baghdad. They actually say that the house of az-Zuhri was covered with books everywhere. That the manner by which he died is that a bookshelf fell on his head. There was so many books he didn't know where to put them. And we actually saw someone's house that just looks like that. And he has insurance, I think in the millions, just on his library. Because there's just so many books. But there's so many books that, you know, it is actually said that one of the bookshelves fell on his head and killed him, subhanAllah. He also studied under Ja'far as-Sadiq, the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ. You know, one last thought on his teachers. Basically, Nafi' and Ibn Shihab were interested in hadith, and Rabi'a was more interested in fiqh. So both of them kind of gave Malik the balance that he had when he became a scholar in his own right. So inshallah, we're going to take a 3-minute break. If you would like to just go outside, get some water, freshen up a little bit, and then come back, we will continue inshallah. Jazakumullah. On Imam Malik ibn Anas, Imam Dar al-Hijrah, the great scholar of Islam, the founder of the Maliki Madhab. We talk, inshallah, in this section about his traveling and the places he visited and the people he saw, experiences he had, and the cities he spent time at, and that all contributed, obviously, to his career as a great scholar. How many places did Imam Malik visit in his life? None. He never left Medina, ever, except for Hajj, in which he would just go to Mecca. So he considered going to Mecca a travel. Imam Malik really confined himself to Medina. And the reason is because he thought, you know, what is the purpose of going anywhere if I have everything I want, everything I need, and the greatest people and the greatest institutions around me? So why go to other places? He did not have a favorable view of the way Islam was being practiced in Egypt or Damascus or Iraq. So he said to himself, you know what, I'm probably better off just staying here in Medina. And as you can see, as opposed to Abu Hanifa, who traveled a lot, even Imam Shafi'i traveled, as opposed to most of Malik's students themselves, who actually traveled quite a bit. Malik himself would not leave Medina, except when he went to Mecca. And again, going back to the theme of this lecture, that contributed to his emphasis on taqleed, right? The lack of exposure in and of itself made it difficult for Imam Malik to consider other opinions, and therefore to even attempt to process those opinions and use ra'i in any way. Now, jurisprudence, the fiqh of Imam Malik. And let's talk about his teaching methodology, which falls under jurisprudence. It is actually said that Imam Malik, for about like the 50 years of his career, that he wouldn't laugh or smile, because he thought that the knowledge, while conducting his classes, because he thought that the knowledge of Islam is just way too honorable and consecrated to be insulted by humor or anything like that. And SubhanAllah, and as Brother Muhammad Ali told you earlier, his students used to be also very vigilant about that. But then it's different from the way we do things in the modern world. We're trying to prod people to come to the masajid. We're trying to encourage people to learn. And we live in such difficult times. Imam Malik sort of, he took his students for granted, because there were thousands of them, right? And so the environment was definitely different. Now, every time he is asked a question, he would try to answer that question to the best of his ability. But every time the question is about halal and haram, he would completely treat it in a different way. Okay? So someone comes to him and says, "Yeah, Imam, how do I perform ghusl, for instance? Or how do I do tayammum? Or what's the best time to pray sunnah after dhuhr? Or should I pray tahiyatul masjid when the imam is giving khutbah or not?" Right? These are questions that would require some descriptive answer. But if the question is halal and haram, like, is it okay to do this? Or is it halal or haram to do that? Here's what Imam Malik would do. He would basically go and perform wudu. Right? And then he would wear a scent and a turban, again, sort of following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, covering the head. And he would burn some incense in the room, and then he would create this spiritual environment, dressed properly, wearing perfume, in a state of wudu. And then he would actually answer the question about halal and haram if he knew the answer. Otherwise he would just say, "I don't know." Right? So after all this, he would just say, "Sorry, I don't have the answer." So imagine like someone comes to me and he's like, Imam is celebrating Thanksgiving, halal or haram. And then I'll be like, "Give me 1 second, I need to go to the bathroom. I need to make wudu first, right? Or I need to change. Or I need to..." SubhanAllah, the dynamics have become completely different in this day and age. We are so quick in issuing those fatwas right and left, right? We are so quick in saying this is haram, or so quick in saying it's halal. Now, I think there's nothing wrong with it, right? On what basis are you saying this? Is this your opinion? I mean, did you have a dream about it? Is that like, did you read it in one of your kids' stories? I mean, how do you come to a conclusion that this is haram or this is halal? Because I'm not a scholar or anything, but it looks wrong to me. It just looks bad. Imam Malik, because he's so worried that this is a kabira, it's a major sin, to suggest that something is haram, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not define it as haram, it's a kabira, it's a major sin. Why? Because you are interfering in the business of the Lord, and that is to make laws. This is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reserved to Himself. It is the Lord's business, not our business, to say what's right and what's wrong. So the assumption is that everything is right, everything is acceptable, everything is halal, except for those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made haram. And it is only Allah that makes things haram, not us. Is that clear? And this is a fundamental principle of Islamic law. So Imam Malik is so worried that he might say it's halal and then lead people astray, or say it's haram and bring hardship to their lives. He would make sure that he brings Allah into the decision while he's making it. He makes wudu, he follows the sunnah and wears nice clothes and covers his head with a turban. Again, it might sound silly to us, but he was just trying. I'm going to say something that will either lead people astray or give them hard time for years. And then scholars, they change their opinion. So 3 years later, you're presented with better evidence, and then you say, well, I was wrong 3 years ago when I said that. What about people who followed what you said for 3 years? When you told that sister, this and that is haram, or are haram, and then she followed what you said for 3 years, and you came later and said, well, I studied this further and I realized that it actually wasn't. And then she went out of her way to follow what you told her, and then 3 years later, sorry. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't accept that. If you're not able to provide a proper answer with humility, it's a spiritual experience. Before you answer a question like that, then you're better off not even touching it. Now, as opposed to Abu Hanifa, which we also mentioned last time, if you remember, Abu Hanifa would always deal with hypothetical situations. Like he would, remember when I talked about his teaching methodology, that he would give his students hypothetical situations. You know, I think I gave an example last time of you are there visiting the animal farm, and then there's this car that basically splashed some water from this little puddle of water, and then there's a camel standing next to it, so you don't know if that's urine or... I mean, there's those hypothetical fiqhi dilemmas. He would give those to his students. Now, Malik would always refrain from doing that. Don't talk to me about hypotheticals. Any student who comes to him, Imam Malik, what if I visited an animal farm and then there's a cart that, you know, went over this puddle and splashed some water, and there's actually a camel next to it. And I wasn't sure if that's urine or not. What do I do then? What do I do then? And Malik would always say, did that actually happen? And the student would be like, no, it's important knowledge for me because it might happen. You never know. And Malik would say, no, I'm not going to touch this. Let's not talk about it. He did not encourage hypotheticals. And some might say, you know, on the one hand, this is actually a reasonable approach because, you know, why, as they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why do we have to devise a fiqhi solution to something that did not actually happen? Why waste resources on something like this? Abu Hanifa would say, because it's about knowledge. Because it's about knowledge. Because it's about preparing students to deal with difficult situations. Because I want them to take this analogy and apply it somewhere else under difficult circumstances. And I want them to understand not the results, but the methodology by which we reached those results. Abu Hanifa would be interested in that. Malik was more practical. And again, see, all of that contributed to the notion of taqleed, right? Because let us just see what Abdullah ibn Umar said. His fiqh is entirely about things that actually happened at his time. Let's just apply that and live with it. When something happens, we deal with it when it comes, kind of attitude. Now, I also talked to you about how his students actually did write down his fatwas and his religious edicts, as opposed to Abu Hanifa, who discouraged his students from writing most of this stuff. And let's talk about the transmission of Maliki fiqh, because that's also very important. And let me just share with you sort of a social science observation before we proceed. What is the part of the Muslim world in which the Maliki madhab is quite widespread?
North Africa.
North Africa, right? North and West Africa, actually. Morocco, and, you know, parts of Algeria, and you know, Mauritania, and those countries. While at the time of Imam Malik, probably towards the end of his life, under Harun al-Rashid, the Maliki madhab was quite widespread in Iraq, the Hijaz, and so many places, right? It actually, in terms of numbers, the followers of Imam Malik way surpassed that of Abu Hanifa, right? And obviously there were no Shafi'is or Hanbalis at that point yet, because they came later. Why is it that the primary observation that I have is that the heartland of Islam is mostly Hanbali and Shafi'i, while Hanafis and Malikis have been pushed to the frontiers? Have you noticed that before? Like Hanafis are mostly South Asians, the Turks, even Indonesians, they're mostly Hanafis. But Arabs are mostly Hanbalis and Shafi'is. I mean, there are traces of Hanafism here and there. But the Middle East, the heartland of Islam, you know, the Fertile Crescent, the Iraq, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, the peninsula, they're mostly Shafi'is and Hanbalis. I'm sorry. Again, I'm not saying that all of them are like that. I'm just saying in terms of numbers, statistically, there are more concentrations in those areas. And I think the theory that is the hypothesis that is being presented to explain this is that, as I said, both Maliki and Hanafi fiqh were driven primarily by activism, by the desire to change society, by the desire to confront political aggression on part of the political leadership and authority. Activism mattered not more, but perhaps as much as ilm for them, which was not the case with the Shafi'i and the Hanbali fiqh. Right? Not to suggest that Shafi'is and Hanbalis were complacent with political leaders, but they were focused on ilm. And Ahmad ibn Hanbal became, sort of dragged into that fitna against his will. Khalq al-Quran, we'll talk about this when the time comes. But what I'm saying is that because those two madhahib were primarily based on activism, they were gradually, the institutions of Hanafi and Maliki fiqh in the heartland were gradually dismantled. And they were pushed to the frontiers because, they would always try to run away from persecution. So they would travel as far as possible from Baghdad and from Mecca and Medina. Do you understand? And we see this very, very clear in terms of how the Malikis, spread into North Africa, because I was actually Hisham ibn Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, Abdurrahman ibn Muawiyah, one of few surviving Umayyad princes that were able to flee the Abbasids and Abu al-Abbas al-Safa and traveled all the way to Spain. And he established the Umayyad dynasty over there. It was his son Hisham that was so inspired by Malik, and he adopted the Maliki madhab. And it started to spread in the Andalus from there. And there was also a man, his name was Abdullah ibn Idris. He was one of the great leaders, established the Al-Adarisa, the dynasty of the Adarisa in Morocco. And he also adopted the Maliki madhab. You see now why it is so quite widespread in that part of the world. So I think that would be my approach to why it was basically pushed to the frontiers. But the transmission of Maliki fiqh was basically and primarily through books and students. Now, how many books did Abu Hanifa author? 0. He didn't author or publish any books. It was his students that did that. Malik, on the other hand, authored many, many books. Right? Again, it goes back to the notion of taqleed. You see, the followers, the students of Imam Malik, they had something solid. They can go back to what he said directly, but the followers of Abu Hanifa, they have to interpret what he says. A great collection of Maliki fiqh, which is really the standard, is one that was put together by Al-Qirafi, Shihab al-Qirafi, who is a great Maliki jurist. He had a huge number of students, much, much larger than the number of students that Abu Hanifa had. And it's something very interesting actually about his students is that they came from all parts of the world. So they would study with him and then they travel back to their home countries. Right? And as much as Malik did taqleed and imitated his own teachers, his students did not imitate him. Because they had to travel, and they had to apply the principles of Islam in a different environment. See, the problem with Amalu Ahl al-Madina, the actions of all the people of Medina, which is one of the primary sources of fiqh in the Maliki madhab, the problem with that is that it applies in Medina very well when it comes to primary issues, the primary issues of the deen. But once we get into the secondary issues where the culture is different, we're going to run into problems. So his students had to say, okay, let's adhere with what Malik said in principle, but we will use our own ijtihad when it comes to furu', when it comes to the secondary issues or the branches. And that's why, like I said earlier, the issue of taqleed did not actually latch on into the Maliki madhab. It didn't. It was interestingly transmitted into the Shafi'i madhab through one of Malik's students. His name was Muhammad ibn Idris, also known as Shafi'i. You guys need to write stuff down, by the way. There's this beautiful verse of poetry that says, العلم قيد والكتاب العلم صيد والكتابة قيده فأحكم صيودك بالقيد الأحكمي. It says that knowledge is like if you're a hunter, knowledge is the deer, right? And if you capture the deer and you don't tie it down, it'll eventually just run, right? So ilm, I mean, it feels so good. You're listening, mashallah, that makes a lot of sense. It's a perfect example. This is an incredible analogy. But I promise you, in 2 days, you'll have forgotten 99% of what we talked about here. Right? And if you don't write a few points down in order to refer back to it, it's going to be miserable. You're going to be very upset at yourself. So remember that, inshallah. Alright, so let's go into the methodology, inshallah, of his fiqh, of the Maliki fiqh. And Imam Malik relied on 9 sources of fiqh, as opposed to Abu Hanifa, who relied on how many? 6. Wow. Abu Hanifa had 6 sources, and Malik had 9. Yes, Malik even had more than 9, but they were not primary sources. So let's put them all together. Quran, Sunnah, Ijma'u Ahl al-Ilm, which is the consensus of the people of knowledge, the scholars, and with it Ijma'u Ahl al-Madinah, even if they're not scholars, the consensus of the dwellers of Medina, the people of Medina, the people who just lived there, even if they were not scholars, but if they all agreed on certain things, he would also take that to heart and take it as a source of fiqh as well. Al-Qiyas, analogy, Al-Istihsan, which is basically discretion when it comes to issues that will have an impact on the general public. So choosing between this and that. If you have 2 conflicting opinions, and this one will have that consequence socially, and that one will have that consequence, I'll go with this one because it has less consequences. Al-Urf, which is basically the prevalent culture. Al-Masalih al-Mursalah. And the last one is Sadd al-Dhara'i', basically blocking the means by which haram things can be justified. So even if the method itself is acceptable, but it might lead to the justifying of something haram, he would also block the method. It's called blocking the means, or Sadd al-Dhara'i'.
That's 8 only.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, that was 8 only. That's 9.
Oh, okay, that was 8?
That's 10.
No, you said 8.
Some people say that's 10. Is that 9?
Yeah.
I think we'll go the average. I think that sounds safe. Let me go through them again. Quran, Sunnah, Ijma'u Ahl al-Ilm, Ijma'u Ahl al-Madinah, Al-Qiyas, Al-Istihsan, Al-Urf, Al-Masalih al-Mursalah, and Sadd al-Dhara'i'. That's 9, right?
Yes.
Masalih al-Mursalah, by the way, I don't think I translated that, the considerations of public interest. Imam Abu Hanifa had only 6: Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', Qiyas, Istihsan, and Urf. How many did Imam Shafi'i had? Only 4: Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', and Qiyas. But we'll talk about it when the time comes. Part of his methodology also is that he was able to collect all of the opinions that I mentioned to you earlier of the Sahaba and codify them in a book that he called Al-Muwatta. Al-Muwatta means the paved. That it was made so easy. Again, remember what I said earlier? Dividing ilm into knowledge for the elite and knowledge for the general public. He published a book that is particularly for the general public, not for the academics. Right? Al-Muwatta, he called it Al-Muwatta. It is made easy. It's paved, right? It is summarized, and it's just, and subhanAllah, it was all because he was asked to do that by the Khalifa himself, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, who, by the way, last time, remember I told you that he used to be a faqih himself before he got into political leadership, and that horrifically corrupted him. But Al-Muwatta was basically a collection of all these sayings of the Prophet ﷺ and that of the Sahaba and the applications of them. So it was both hadith and fiqh. And Al-Muwatta was adopted by the Khalifa, and he was basically sent to all parts of the empire. You see, when Brother Muhammad Ali said earlier that Imam Malik preferred to work through the system, not without, not from without, but rather from within, that was his perspective, that was his approach. Change it from the inside. And it is not like it protected him, by the way, from getting a lot of flack from the Abbasids, but it made a difference in terms of making sure that social model, that template is actually exported into other places by getting the Khalifa himself to buy into it. And when the Khalifa accepted it, he started sending it all around. As a matter of fact, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur told him, "Ya Imam, let us actually compel the fuqaha in all of the different provinces to use Al-Muwatta as the platform," and he refused. And he said, "No. What works in Medina might not work in other places. We apply all the usul, all the fundamentals here and there, everywhere. Fundamentals of the deen will not change, but maybe in the branches, people will find a better fiqhi opinion that suits their circumstances." So Al-Muwatta in many ways is actually the predecessor of Sahih al-Bukhari. Al-Bukhari had to rely on Al-Muwatta to create a core platform of ahadith, and he built on it basically. Imam Malik would spend up to 5 or 6 years mulling over an issue before he says it's halal or haram. 5 years, just thinking about it. So worried that a word might come out of his mouth and he's not 100% certain, and it might does something to other people's lives, he would spend up to 5 years, sometimes 7 years, just mulling it over and thinking about it before he issues an edict. Imam Malik's students, interesting and diverse group, most notably Abdul Rahman ibn al-Qasim. And as I said, they came from all over the place. So Abdul Rahman stayed with Imam Malik for about 20 years, and he disagreed greatly with Imam Malik, not only when it came to his fiqh, but also his political views. Like, he was very upset that Imam Malik is accepting stipends from the Khalifa. And he traveled to Egypt, and he became one of the great scholars over there. Abdullah ibn Wahb, who was called the Sea of Knowledge, and also stayed with Imam Malik for about 20 years. And he actually, one of his quotes is he says, "I spent 20 years with Imam Malik, I learned his fiqh in 1 year, and I spent 19 years learning his manners." One story, Abdullah ibn Wahb, is actually said that he was sitting among a group of other students with Imam Malik, and then there's this elephant that is walking on the street outside. An elephant, right? And Arabs were not used to seeing elephants. They would only bring them if there was like a battle somewhere in Africa or whatever, or in Persia, and then they bring those animals into Medina and so forth, in order to carry massive logs of trees or whatever. So Arabs were not used to seeing elephants. So little kids, right? And they saw the elephant, so most of them just ran outside. And Abdullah ibn Wahb, just stayed inside. And Malik, smiled, and he said, "Why didn't you go run with the rest of the kids?" And he said, "I came all the way from Egypt to study with Malik, not to see an elephant." So inshallah, I will also give you another very, very short break, and then we have the political environment and a couple of other very, very important things to cover. As a matter of fact, if you guys are okay, I can just go on. Sure? Yeah. Okay. So let's do that, because I'm just worried that we might not have enough time to cover this extremely important section. Imam Malik lived in Medina under both Umayyad and Abbasi rule. As a matter of fact, 13 khulafa rose to power in his life. 13. And there was massive political turmoil all over the Muslim world, basically. But the nature of turmoil in Medina was different than any other place, interestingly. because the influence of the rebellions of Ahlul Bayt was not as rampant and as strong and as widespread in the Hijaz as it was in Iraq. And he believed in basically working from within the system. So as I said earlier, Imam Malik was not driven by the persecution of Ahlul Bayt as Imam Abu Hanifa was. He believed in working from within the system and changing it. He was able to influence the Khalifa to adopt his great book Al-Muwatta and so on and so forth. But there's something about Malik that some of the historians actually accused him of. And they said that Malik was pro-Umayyad. And they keep saying that because Imam Malik had not extremely, but unfavorable views of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And every time he is asked about Khulafa al-Rashidin, the rightly guided Khulafa, he would say Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Umar ibn al-Khattab, hesitate a little bit and says Uthman, and he would stop there. And then when asked, why do you have unfavorable views of Ali? Imam Malik would always say, number one, he moved the capital of the Muslim world from Medina to Kufa. And I don't like that. Why? Why move away from the heartland of Islam? And then he would say, well, even though Imam Ali inadvertently got involved in these battles and these wars, but he's still indirectly responsible for massive bloodshed. Thousands of Sahaba were killed in those wars. And Imam Malik was kind of hurt by that. But at the same time, he also had very unfavorable views of Uthman ibn Affan. Right? There's actually this saying that he basically lumped some Zubayr ibn Awam, Talha ibn Ubaydillah, who were basically fighting against Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib with Aisha and so forth. And Uthman and Ali, and he says, they basically fought for dunya. That was his view as a scholar. He considered both parties to have fought for dunya. Obviously, that doesn't apply to Abu Hanifa, remember? Abu Hanifa was absolutely favorable to, he had very favorable views of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, and the dynamic was completely different. So he had these, I'm not going to say balanced, but it was basically equal opportunity resentment to both camps who fought that fitna. He said that both were wrong. Those on the side of Ali and those on the side of Muawiyah, they both fought for dunya. We may or may not agree with that, but that was his view. Imam al-Nas indi ba'da Umar Zayd ibn Thabit. He would say, the greatest leader in my judgment after Umar ibn al-Khattab is Zayd, not Uthman. Right? And after Zayd ibn Thabit, Abdullah ibn Umar, the teacher of his teacher. So as Brother Muhammad Ali mentioned to you earlier, the reason Imam Malik accepted gifts from the Khulafa is that he did not want to offend them, and he wanted access to them, and he wanted to not have to spend time as Abu Hanifa did, running a business and making money. He wanted to make sure that there is enough income that he can use to basically maintain the basics of life, but also to have access, because accepting the gift was a political gesture at the time. To have access to the Khulafa to try to effect changes from within the system. And many of the Khulafa, especially the Abbasis, they had great respect for Imam Malik to the extent that, subhanAllah, the Khalifa would come to the Imam at a very young age as a student, would grow up and go into adulthood and become a Khalifa himself, and then send his kids to Imam Malik to learn as well. But then those who say that Imam Malik was pro-Umayyad and he didn't have favorable views of Ahlul Bayt and stuff like that, that view is also refuted by the fact that Imam Malik encouraged, he didn't support the rebellion, but he encouraged Muslims to join Muhammad al-Nafs al-Zakir, Muhammad ibn al-Hasan ibn Ali, right? Who was a descendant of al-Hasan, not al-Hussein, who rose against the Umayyads in the Hijaz. He would actually ask people to join him, and he supported his rebellion without even either giving money or getting involved himself. There was one story that got him in big trouble with the Abbasis, and that is basically, he was once asked about divorce. If someone divorced his wife while being forced to do it, would that divorce count? I mean, let me ask you the same question. If someone forced you to do something that is haram, would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hold that against you? If you had absolutely no choice but to do it. If you choose between that and your life.
We didn't know. No, I don't think so.
Right? As a matter of fact, there's a hadith in which the Prophet says, وَضَعَ اللَّهُ عَنْ أُمَّتِ الْخَطَأَ وَالنِّسْيَانِ وَمَا اسْتُكْرِهُ عَلَيْهِ. Allah will not hold my ummah accountable for mistakes, for things they've done while forgetting, they were forgetful, or for things they were forced to do. Right? So alhamdulillah, this is really good news for Muslims. But the thing is, he was asked about divorce, and he said, no, if he's forced to divorce, like at gunpoint or sword edge, divorce your wife, and then he's just trying to save his life, and he said, I divorce you, does that count? He said, no, it doesn't count. There's no such thing in Sharia. Abu Ja'far al-Mansur took that in a very different way. He knew that he had to force people to give pledges of allegiance to the Abbasids against their own will. And now the Imam is saying, any pledge that is done, or anything that is done under pressure, doesn't count. That means there's going to be a rebellion everywhere. They're going to all go against us, right? And basically void their pledges, because they'll say, hey, we've done that under duress, we've done that under pressure, so it doesn't count. So Abu Ja'far al-Mansur heard that, so he planted a spy in the halaqah of Imam Malik in order to really verify that he said that. And the spy asked him, and Imam Malik answered the same question, answered the same answer. So the governor of Medina arrested Imam Malik, and they tortured him. And that was the first time he had to encounter that. Again, you know, he was using all these subtle, indirect ways of changing the system without getting in trouble with the political establishment, unlike Abu Hanifa, who got in trouble, you know, every step of the way. But still, at the end, he gets picked up by the police and he's tortured. And actually say that both his shoulders were dislocated for a while, and his arms were just dangling like this, unable to lift him up. But Medina went into turmoil when they heard that Imam Malik was arrested. And there was a revolt and just vandalism. And they really destroyed police stations and stuff like that. So immediately the Khalifa issued a ruling to let Imam Malik go. And he had a meeting with him the following Hajj season in which he apologized to him. And that was a meeting in which he talked to him about writing Al-Muwatta. Yeah, Imam, you have such great ideas. Why don't you put that together in the form of this great book and let us adopt it? And that's basically how Al-Muwatta came to existence. A couple of more things, inshallah, and then we'll open the door for questions and answers. Alhamdulillah that time did not drag on. All right. Imam Malik engaged the Mu'tazila in lots and lots of debates about their view that the Quran was created, and that basically later on led to the Inquisition, in which Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal was caught in the middle of, and inshallah I'll talk about that in a couple of months when we address Ahmad ibn Hanbal. He also had a huge issue with Qadariyah. Remember I told you there was a very vibrant Qadariyah movement in Medina at the time. But Imam Malik would basically engage them in discourse, but he frowned upon his students if they attended Qadariyah meetings, or if they married Qadariyah women or something like that. He would get very, very upset. So he wanted to sort of seclude his students from the Qadariyah, but again would not incite any violence against them whatsoever. Every time he's asked of his opinion of particular Sahaba, for political reasons, because they always say, okay, what do you think of Amr ibn al-As? And if you say he was a good guy, then you were pro-Muawiyah. If you say he's a bad guy, then you were pro-Ali. Right? What do you think of Khalid ibn al-Walid? What do you think of this Sahabi and that Sahabi? So you refrain from answering questions about the particular Sahaba, because again, he did not want political repercussions that would just corrupt his work. And then he ends up in prison and he's unable to achieve anything, so he was just trying to avoid that. One of the greatest sayings of Imam Malik, one that we actually still say today, اختلاف أهل العلم رحمة. How many of you heard that before? The differences between scholars is a mercy. How many of us, we keep saying that, right? That was actually coined by Imam Malik, and it was a very long excerpt. I don't think we have time to go through the whole thing. But even though he focused on taqleed himself, and he wanted to derive that knowledge fresh and pure directly from the Sahaba and the generation of the Tabi'een, he still acknowledged that the human mind will always come to different conclusions. And we have to accept that as a fact of life and cherish it and celebrate it. And if there are good, reliable, sincere scholars who have opposing views, we shouldn't consider that to be a bad thing. Later in his life, Imam Malik became very, very sick. And it reached a point where he became so frail that he was basically unable to go to the masjid anymore. He was so weak that, actually they say for a couple of years, he did not pray at the masjid because he was so sick and so weak to even step foot in the masjid and pray. He died at the age of 90, again in Medina, after he gave birth to this incredible school of thought. And one of the unique things I think of the Maliki madhab is that, when you think about it, it was the madhab that prevailed in Western Europe that almost led to the Renaissance. Actually, they say that the writings of great European scholars such as Thomas Aquinas and others were actually inspired by Maliki fiqh in so many ways. If you read, I have a couple of books actually for Thomas Aquinas. If you read some of his works, he specifically uses Arabic words, and then he translates them. He doesn't make a direct reference to Imam Malik, but he makes a direct reference to some of the great scholars in Andalusia, such as Ibn Rushd and so forth, who were almost all Malikis, right? So it is also interesting to think that the madhab of Islam that was so close to Europe right before it underwent the Renaissance process was the Maliki madhab, is also a testament to the greatness of Imam Malik and his ideas and his thoughts. And that's actually, the issue of taqleed worked. It worked at least at the level of the fundamentals, al-usul. And it led to the preservation of, let's at least agree on these fundamentals, and we can have disagreements about the furu', about the branches, it would not hurt anyone. So, in a very interesting and indirect way, the Maliki madhab had a huge impact on Western scholarship and on the Renaissance itself, which, again, credit for that goes to the sincerity and hard work and the incredible commitment of Imam Malik. And I think, inshallah, I'll end it at that and give you a chance to ask questions. Jazakumullah khairan for being such good listeners, as always, and for enduring a couple of hours of learning with us in this strict classroom environment. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help you take that knowledge and do some good with it in your own families, in your own communities, with your friends, to inspire you to embark upon a career of learning Islam and becoming a scholar. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless you for being seekers of knowledge. Jazakumullah khairan again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, if you have any questions, please fire.
Yeah, my question regarding the Muwatta.